I'm Cesar Delgado from Back Roads of Illinois podcast. Welcome to the show with Megan Anderson from Iowa State University Extension. Megan is an agronomy for Central Iowa for Iowa State University Extension. How are things in Central Iowa for you?
Things in Central Iowa are really pretty well. We had a pretty smooth harvest season, and higher than expected crop yields across most of the state, I would say. And so we've had a nice long spell here to get some good field work done and not a lot of rain or anything else.
Let's start with this season. How was the growing season in Iowa with drought?
Yeah, it really depended on where you were in the state. The northwest part of the state has been excessively dry for several years. And then just this growing season, the northeast part of the state was also extremely dry. The rest of us had spells of being dry. We were all on the drought monitor, but overall, it seemed like northwest and northeast were the areas that took that the hardest this growing season. But really, we were all quite dry, but seemed to receive timely rainfalls anyway.
Mm-hmm. There is any weeds has affected the corn yields for the farmers for this season?
Weeds are a constant issue that we deal with in Iowa, and I know I drove through Illinois in September, and it looked like weeds were an issue for some farmers in Illinois as well. I would say that in most cases, the weeds that we're dealing with are primarily going to be water hemp, and maybe a handful of others just in small areas of fields. But for the most part, the water hemp is likely not having a big effect on crop yield, but it is a problem in that we're unable to control it. And it's getting harder by the year with the increase in herbicide resistances that we're dealing with here in the state. And so I don't think that'll change next year, but definitely this year control was really difficult in corn. And so it'll be interesting to see what those fields look like next year if they go to soybean.
Yeah, I saw some ragweeds in Scott County.
Yeah, we don't have much for ragweed pressure in most fields, but certainly in the eastern part of the state, we see more ragweeds where there's less tillage that happens. But we certainly have our fair share of water hemp all over the place, unfortunately.
Can you explain to the farmers about your recommendation for cover crop? What is the best of their farm?
So the cover crop species choice really depends on kind of a farm by farm decision based on what a farmer's what their goals are going to be for a cover crop, and in my mind, especially the time frame that they have to grow the cover crop. So it seems like here in Iowa, the one that works really well for most farmers would be planting a cereal rye cover crop ahead of soybean. It's very winter hardy. It seems to come up even very late in the growing season, so we can, even if our corn harvest goes late, we can still seemingly get it planted. And it seems to have some of the best odds to provide us some good opportunity for weed suppression, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people like to grow the cover crops. But certainly in some areas, people may have different goals with their cover crops. They may want different things from it, and they may be growing it in a slightly different season. And so I think the most challenging thing with cover crops is that the sky is kind of the limit. Just about anything could serve as a cover crop. It just depends on how well it's going to grow given the season that you provide it.
The corn yields for this year in Iowa.
I think overall our corn yield is probably not going to be quite as high overall, I think, as it was in 2021 and 2022. But I do still think that it will be very competitive with those numbers Some areas, those yields were definitely lower than they were in prior years, but I think everybody still remains pleasantly surprised. And I know there are some farmers in my part of the state here in central Iowa that once again, maybe for the third year in a row, harvested a record yield off of some of their acres. And so it's just really pretty remarkable how well our corn crop performed, given the fact that we remained in drought for basically the entire growing season.
Is there anything would you like to go to be telling the farmers about harvest tip for this season?
Yeah, so our harvest is pretty well wrapped up at this point, but we have a lot of field work that's still happening here in central Iowa. And so, in my mind, farmers basically know what they're doing, especially now that soil temperatures are cooled off and we're just kind of wrapping things up. Something that we've run into the past several years that I think is important that people always think about are a couple things. One of which is that when we remove higher than expected crop yields, we are removing higher than expected crop nutrients. And so making sure that we're replacing those nutrients we remove in order to make sure that we can maintain those high yields in future years is really important, especially in my part of the state. There's a lot of interest in harvesting corn stover off of crop fields. And so when we take that corn stover off, we're removing even more nutrients than maybe we did with that crop yield. And so I think that's important for people to remember. The other thing is that when we've been in these dry conditions, we've really started to notice issues that people have had with dry fertilizer application. So not only do we want to replace the nutrients we remove, but we want to make sure that they are replaced back in a way that is evenly spread across our acres or across the area where that nutrient's needed so that the crop can use it next year. And when we're in dry conditions, it's especially prevalent when we see issues with dry fertilizer application. And so making sure that we're taking what precautions we can to avoid issues is really important.
My pleasure that you joined the show for today. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you for having me.
I am.
This is Megan Anderson for Iowa State University from back roads of Illinois. I am Caesar Delgado.